Let's take a moment to review the types of muscle tissue since it's been a little while since chapter 4. Now recall that we have three types of muscle tissue in the human body. We have skeletal muscle, we have cardiac muscle, and we have smooth muscle. So let's review skeletal muscle since it's the main focus of chapter 9 here. So skeletal muscle is named because it is attached to the bones of the skeleton, and so it functions in moving the skeleton. But not only that, it also functions to maintain posture when we are standing or sitting. Skeletal muscles also behave like straps that help to stabilize synovial joints. And skeletal muscles also function to generate body heat. So roughly 85% of our body heat is generated from skeletal muscles. So that's why we shiver when we are cold, because skeletal muscles are contracting and trying to warm us up. And it's also why we sweat when we're exercising, because the movement of our muscles produces a lot of body heat. So let's look at the attributes of skeletal muscles as a tissue. So skeletal muscle cells are long and cylinder shaped, and so for that reason they're often called muscle fibers. So in this diagram here, since the muscle cells are so long, we can't actually see the entire cell in this light micrograph image. Because they are large cells, they have multiple nuclei per cell, and they need those multiple nuclei to coordinate the normal cellular functions. So we use the term multinucleate to describe this attribute of having multiple nuclei per cell. We see that skeletal muscle is also striated because skeletal muscle cells are packed with these highly specialized organelles that create the contractions that generate the movement for those skeletal muscles. So what we are seeing with these striations, that we're seeing the overlap of the contractile proteins within these special organelles. Skeletal muscle is also consciously controlled. That is, we have conscious control over when skeletal muscle contracts. We have voluntary movement of the skeleton. And so for that reason, it is described as a voluntary muscle tissue. So the reason that skeletal muscle is large and multinucleate is because skeletal muscle cells develop from the fusion of lots of these small embryonic muscle cells that are called myoblasts. So that's skeletal muscle. Let's review cardiac muscle here before moving on to smooth muscle. So cardiac muscle is named because it is only found in the walls of the heart. The cells tend to be a lot smaller than skeletal muscle cells, so it only has one nucleus per cell. We see that it's also striated like skeletal muscle cells, but the organization of those contractile proteins is not as neat as it is in skeletal muscle. So we don't get as clean and clear of striations in cardiac muscle as we do in skeletal muscle. We do not have conscious control over cardiac muscle, rather it's controlled automatically by the nervous system, and so this makes it an involuntary muscle tissue. Cardiac muscle bundles form kind of roughly a figure 8 shape in the walls of the heart. So when the cardiac muscle contracts, the bundles cause the volume of the chambers to decrease. And in this way, the heart is able to act like a pump because the chamber volume decreases. That puts pressure on the blood inside of those chambers and forces that blood into the next chamber or any of the large blood vessels if that chamber happens to be connected to a blood vessel. So finally, we have smooth muscle. And smooth muscle, recall, is found in a variety of locations. So we find it lining the walls of the digestive, the urinary system, and the respiratory system as well. So when the muscle here contracts, it constricts or decreases the diameter of these structures. And when it relaxes, it tends to increase the diameter of those structures as well. We also see that the regular contraction and relaxation of smooth muscle in the digestive and urinary systems helps to propel food and waste through those systems. We also find smooth muscle in the erector pili muscles, which these are the small muscles in your skin that attach to body hairs. And these muscles make the hair stand on end when we are cold or when we are frightened. It's also found in the pupils of our eyes. This helps to change the diameter of the opening in the center of the eye called the iris. So in bright light, the iris diameter is small so that it lets in only a little bit of very bright light. And in dim light, the iris diameter is large to help let in lots of very dim light into the eye, because when light is very dim, we need to gather more of that light in order for our eye to form an image. And so for that reason, the pupil will dilate when it is in a low light environment. We also see smooth muscle in the walls of the uterus, and this is where it contracts during childbirth. So the properties of smooth muscle, we see that smooth muscle cells are small, thin, and thread-like, and it's kind of hard to make the distinction between individual smooth muscle cells in this image here, but you get these small thread-like cells, and there's one nucleus per cell here. So the nucleus is this dark purple kind of rod-shaped organelle that you see there. It's called smooth muscle because, as you can see here, we don't see those striations like we see in cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle. And so for this reason, we call it smooth muscle, because it lacks those striations. And just like cardiac muscle, smooth muscle is not consciously controlled, so it falls under the category of an involuntary muscle tissue.